The Liberal government is marking 3 years in power as we look toward federal elections 1 year from Sunday. And you could say the Liberals are on a high this week, fulfilling the promise to legalize cannabis. Yes, there had to be a pun in that. Let's bring in our weekending strategy session with political commentator Jerry Nichols, coming to us from Toronto. In Regina, we have Sally Hauser, a senior consultant with Navigator. And with me here in studio, Sarah Bain from H&K Strategies. And thank you all for joining us. So, Jerry, let me start with you on this. So this legislation, it had the world's attention. Is this a big check mark for the government, or is it merely the calm before, here we go again, smoky storm ahead?
Well, I think this is a check mark for the Liberal government. This was one of their big promises. It was a promise they kept. But I'm not sure it's going to be that much of a game changer. I think the people who like this were people who were typically going to vote for the Liberals anyway. I think there's also another side of the story. There might be a lot of people out there who are kind of antsy about legalizing marijuana, not quite sure about it. A lot of middle-class people might not be sure about it. So I think in the short run anyway, it's hard to see how this is going to exactly play out. In the long run, if everything goes smoothly with it, and then it should be something that the Liberals can talk to their base about. But I'm not sure it's something he can hang his hat out in terms of saying, hey, re-elect me because I voted for, to legalize, or I legalized marijuana.
Yeah, okay, so Sally, what's your take on this? Because a lot of people, critics, complain certainly about the rollout. It was too fast. There's so much we don't know about health effects, how to test for impairment, that kind of thing. What do you think?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I agree with Jerry to a certain extent that is this going to be a major voting issue? One, it's kind of done a year in advance. It's not like it just happened and people's memories are particularly short. There's a lot that can go wrong here, but thus far the rollout seems to have gone really quite well. Frankly, the Liberals had to get at least one of the promises they made in the last election out the door. There's a good few of them that haven't been addressed thus far. In terms of, was there enough time? I think this is where, you get kind of blame moving down the chain. If you get any hiccups, anything that goes wrong, well, the provinces are going to want to blame the federal government, and the municipalities are going to want to blame the provinces. But ultimately, I think Canada's been ready for this for some time. And I think given all the kind of panic and not quite hysterics that we've seen so far, at least the first couple of days seem to have gone quite well.
Yeah, and it would seem, Sarah, that the biggest complaint seemed to be the shelves are empty, or they're almost empty, or what about the shortage, and what about, the black market taking over?
Well, I'd start off just by saying, full disclosure, it actually is the industry that I now work in. So I want to start off by saying there are parts of what Jerry and Sally said that I would agree and some that I disagree with. With regards to the shelves, though, we have to remember that we have been in a country where for 75 years we've been under prohibition. So I want to start off by saying this is obviously the importance of this initiative and this policy piece, but what it really demonstrates with this government is ambition. This was an ambitious plan. 75 years under prohibition. In 3 years, they took a policy from nothing to something where today we have a safe, secure, taxable industry now. So that's a big deal, that ambition. But with regards to the shelving, that is a responsibility of both the government and the industry now, right? So in the US, it took about 15 years when they left alcohol prohibition before the industry had enough supply. And it's going to be really important for us to make sure that the black market doesn't get to benefit from now this increased demand for a product.
Okay, so some interesting comments from the Conservative leader, Andrew Scheer. Don Martin asking him on question period yesterday his position on all of this and in terms of cannabis and what he would do if his government, if he were to form a government, and would he repeal the legislation, what would he do about it? Let's run a portion of that question and answer.
The Conservative Party will do our due diligence, examine the consequences of this decision, and we'll examine the reality on the ground. We have to be realistic about what a change like this means to society and all the ramifications. But I can tell you that we are watching this very closely. We'll do what the Liberals didn't do and take an evidence-based approach to what we propose in the next election.
So some interesting comments, Sally, on behalf of Andrew Scheer. When he was asked straight, would he do it? So he's looking at it as though they're still going to look at the possibility of this. What did you think of that?
I think that that's a question he should have maybe been a little better prepared for. on the surface, hey, we're, evidence-based, we're going to take a look, examine all the possibilities. But he didn't sound particularly confident. And I think that, as the leader of the Conservative Party, I don't think this is an issue that they particularly want to talk about a whole lot one way or the other. I think there's a certain element of their base who is not pleased about the legalization or end of prohibition at all. But I think in terms of the broader spectrum of winning the next election, this is not a particularly good issue for them. So given that we've known this date was coming for some time, I would have expected the leader's answer to have been a little more nuanced and maybe a little more polished. It's not all Conservatives, obviously, that have a real distaste for the now legalized cannabis. We see a level of hypocrisy in, former Conservative Prime Ministers even, who are now getting involved in the legal cannabis business, even though they spent some time putting people in jail in the past. So I think the Conservative Party itself is a bit divided on this.
Well, and it would seem because the office of the office of Andrew Scheer, the Conservatives' office, sent out a tweet in response to what Question Period had put out, saying, and I think we have that saying, talk about manufacturing an issue. For 2 straight days and counting, Conservatives, that Andrew Scheer included, have been asking questions about Justin Trudeau's refusal to turn over evidence crucial to Vice Admiral Norman's defence, but you'd rather focus on hypotheticals. So Jerry would look like, they don't really want to be talking about that either.
Yeah, I agree with Sally. They don't really want to talk about marijuana. It's not really their issue. They want to talk about deficits and terrorism and all that kind of stuff. That's why you got a typically Andrew Scheerian style answer, i.e. it was boring. Because he doesn't really want to make this an exciting issue for him. I think if you look at that answer and you want to parse it, what he was basically saying is we're going to wait to see how popular it is. And if it's really popular, then we won't do anything about it, and we'll just let it ride.
Otherwise, then I guess at that point it becomes a campaign issue. Okay, so 3 years into Trudeau's government, 1 year to go until the election, and the polls for the most part still showing that Prime Minister Trudeau has a fairly comfortable lead. And we've got some numbers up from Nanos that we can show you. So the Liberals ballot support at 37.1%, the Conservatives 31.4%, the NDP down at 16%. So let me ask you, Sarah, about this. In terms of 1 year out and what they have to do, the NDP hasn't found its ground yet. There's other polls that show that Jagmeet Singh hasn't found his ground yet. What needs to happen for the NDP in the year ahead?
Well, I don't want to give them free advice,
no.
But I would say, it's 1 year out. So the election has started, and their leader isn't even in the House. So where do we even start? He should be in the House to begin with. But this was advice that I personally was giving him for the last 3 years on this very panel. Sally, I hope he's listening to you. But the thing is, with regards to this, I think in the next election, for the Liberals, I think the battleground is really against the Conservatives and more against that sort of like anti-immigration, vision, the lack of vision that Mr. Scheer demonstrated in the clip that you just showed about cannabis. That's not ambitious to say we're going to watch and see. Make a decision on something. Absolutely, things must be fact-based, but you can still say that while having some sort of opinion on something. So I think for us, for Liberals, we're going to keep on going on an open Canada, an open government, transparency, and the battleground will really be between that anti-immigration, closed-mindedness, and that really more open Canada vision.
Well, and I heard you kind of chuckling, Sally, but let me ask you this, because even if it is a battle more between the Liberals and the Conservatives moving forward for the next little while, Jagmeet Singh was someone that the Liberals, Trudeau was worried about, concerned about in terms of competition back when he first became leader. What happened?
Well, our favorite expression in the NDP is that the Liberals like to run on the left and govern on the right. And thus far, this administration has seemed, to most people, left of center. But I think what we're seeing now is some of those hypocrisies, some of those promises that were made on reconciliation, missing and murdered Indigenous women, on proportional representation, and now particularly an issue that I think is good for the NDP is arms sales and our relations with Saudi Arabia. I think all of those issues, I think the NDP maybe got bogged down in some energy issues and fighting Rachel Notley when they should be fighting Justin Trudeau and Andrew Scheer. But I think there are some of those issues that are coming up now that will show you know, the NDP when they're strongest, and it will be certainly helpful if the leader has a seat in you know, in Parliament before the next election. But I think there is some potential there to bring those numbers quite up.
Jerry, you think there's potential?
For Jagmeet Singh, yeah, I think there's potential. You know, so far he's been basically, you know, a mannequin. He hasn't really done anything or said anything to really make a name for himself. And I think what he has to do is he has to project some kind of vision to distinguish himself from Justin Trudeau. And I think when he first became leader, the plan was, hey, we got a charismatic guy who's going to out-charismize Justin Trudeau. That hasn't worked, so they got to go to Plan B. And my theory for the NDP, for what it's worth, is that they have to really adopt kind of a populist left-wing message. They really have to go after Justin Trudeau on the left, because Justin Trudeau hasn't really lived up to his left-wing sort of branding when he became Prime Minister. If anything, he's been kind of a poster boy for the status quo, for the establishment. So I think there's room there for the NDP to go hard left against Justin Trudeau. It might not work, but right now, it's the only theory I can think of. And you know what? I always say the first thing you need is a theory.
Okay, so let's talk about political fortunes, because 1 year in politics, so 1 year away from the federal election, can be a very long time, and it can be a very short time in terms of what the different parties will do. And I guess I'll start with you here, Sarah, on that. And talking about for the Liberals right now, I mean, it wasn't very long ago that they were looking at a bit of a disaster with NAFTA, so we thought at the time, the pipeline, so we thought at the time. So in terms of what they put into their yes checkmark column and where they go in a year.
Well, I think they certainly will run on that record. Many of us in the communications industry, we say to people we work with, stick to your message and stick to sort of that guiding principle. And that guiding principle of the middle class, I mean, we've heard it so much. We're in the bubble, we hear it consistently. Yeah. But that has really allowed them to stay on a course, and that sort of having that North Star, which was the middle class. And you'll see that now, I think, going into this last year, they're really going to need to give examples of how they were able to accomplish bringing more Canadians into that middle class. Things like the National Child Benefit, the fact that under this Trudeau government, families are getting more money than they were getting under the Harper government. They're going to need concrete examples of that so that they can say that middle class was their North Star.
Okay, so just a few seconds left. Jerry, your thoughts?
Well, I think all things being equal, the Liberals are looking really good for 2019. But of course, in politics, things are rarely equal. I always say the hand of God can come and change the outlook of an election very quickly. I think Trudeau does have vulnerabilities. He does have liabilities. I think that a lot will depend on the voter mindset in 2019. Because Justin Trudeau can't change his personality. He's always going to be the sort of this adorable, selfie-seeking guy. And that worked for him in 2015 because that's what Canadians were looking for. If in 2019 people are anxious about the economy, if they're anxious about terrorism, or they're frightened about the world, they might say, you know what? We want a mean SOB to be our leader. We're tired of this cute guy. We want somebody who's tough. If that's the situation, then Andrew Scheer's got to fulfill that role. So I think both Trudeau and Scheer got to worry about if their personalities sort of mesh with the mindset of Canadian voters a year from now.
Watching all of this over the course of this year, Jerry, Sarah, Sally, thank you all for coming on the show.